Remember in one of my previous videos I said this? That there was once going to be a completely different version of Justice League that we're never going to see. Yeah, well, colour me impressed that somebody at Warner Brothers actually thought, maybe we should deliver what the fans want. Because whilst I personally wasn't at the front line of demanding the Snyder Cut, I was still quite intrigued to find out how differently his true version of Justice League would have turned out. I'll go into further detail next year, but after 3 years of fan outcries and demands, both Zack Snyder and HBO Max will finally be able to deliver his original vision of the movie. Which, after taking this time to calm down and really understanding Mr. Snyder as a person, I am so looking forward to checking it out. Whether it turns out being good or bad, I'm just so glad for both him having this opportunity, as well as the fans to experience what he initially planned for this incarnation of the DC Universe. And so, in anticipation for Zack Snyder's Justice League, I decided to rewatch a movie that I've had quite an emotional bit of history with, and just tried to let go of, ever since I initially saw and hated it in theatres. That being Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. So this movie, which essentially is the mid-installment to Zack's trilogy, was released in 2016 as a means to catch up with the MCU, but despite a strong opening, its box office results took a massive fall after its second weekend, and was received with unfavourable opinions, praised for its selected actor performances and visuals, but criticised for its tone, screenplay, and pacing issues. Coming from someone who's had an unhealthy obsession with trying to understand Dawn of Justice, as well as only seeing it fully 3 times in his life, I can now say that there was a huge amount of potential to create a story that followed up after the events of Man of Steel, as well as heavily focusing on the ideologies of two different sides of justice, with one form of evil trying to destroy what he believes is a false representation of good in the world. Which is why, upon rewatching it with a different perspective, I was hoping to see it in a different way and enjoy it more. But unfortunately, that's not exactly the case, since while I can't say that I do like it more than I used to, I still don't think it reaches that level of quality or enjoyment that I had with Man of Steel. For example, my opinions towards this film's direction for Lex Luthor, played by Jesse Eisenberg, is questionable, to put it best. But that's not inherently towards the character's motives, in which, due to the issues he's had with his father, have led him to believe that any form he sees as godlike is evil, but rather it's all based around how he interacts with the people, as well as, to a good extent, the types of words and phrases he uses. Thus, I honestly think that he pulls off as a better Riddler than Lex Luthor. Also, if you're rather familiar with Zack Snyder's style of filmmaking, then it's pretty evident that, unlike Man of Steel, which, from what I've seen, was a lot more toned down, are a lot more apparent and frequently used in this movie. That includes a lot of dramatic slowdown sequences and a few symbolisms to mythology or religion, which unfortunately kind of hinder the movie rather than enhance it, because it got pretty repetitive after a while. Lastly, the more I really think about it, the whole nightmare sequence, featuring parademons, soldiers that worship Superman, and the implications of Darkseid taking over Earth, was kind of unnecessary. I mean, don't get me wrong, visually it does look cool, with Batman in the trench coat and everything, but that's practically a common trope for Snyder, because that whole scene didn't really seem to fit in with the rest of the story. Of course, we know now that it's going to segue into Justice League's story, as well as supposedly representing Bruce's fear and belief that Superman can take out all of humanity. But it's rather pointless, since, at this rate, they've already established Bruce's perspective and hate towards Superman. Thus, if they decided to take this whole scene out, chances are it wouldn't have made any difference. So, with that said, there is no denying that there are obviously a lot of good things about this movie, with a lot of that being credited for the extra 30 minutes of content in the Ultimate Edition, not seen in the theatrical cut because the studio not wanting to release a 3-hour long film. despite the fact that there are movies like Avengers Endgame that have succeeded in that department. First off, Henry Cavill's portrayal of Clark Kent slash Superman is still done relatively well, despite the fact that he doesn't really say that much when donning the cape or appears as upbeat compared to previous incarnations. Because remember, this is supposed to be set in a somewhat grounded form of reality. He still sells embodying a man who just wants to bring hope to those the best way he possibly can. Not to mention, thanks to those added scenes, he, alongside Lois Lane, played by Amy Adams, are shown a lot more for their acts in journalism. In the case for Clark, he discovers the type of actions Batman uses on criminals, as well as how they affect the citizens of Gotham, thus giving him a reason to hugely disagree with the Bat's methods. Secondly, while I did say earlier that Snyder tends to get a little carried away with selected shots, it would be absolute criminal of me not to confess just how beautiful and outstanding that they turn out to be, both in the cinematography and the artistic side of things, that helps to make them eye-catching and just dramatic as hell. Which is the same that can be said for the soundtrack by the returning Hans Zimmer, alongside Junkie XL to create such magnificent pieces, with the highlights being the themes for Batman, Lex Luthor, and of course Wonder Woman, despite her somewhat lackluster and unnecessary involvement in the movie. Speaking of which, this brings us to my final praise that pretty much everyone can agree with: Ben Affleck's portrayal of Bruce Wayne slash Batman. Because this is an incarnation that we have yet to see on the big screen. Him fighting crime for 20 years and has gone through so much hell that has caused him to change up his rules and perspectives on the world. Which is why finally I can get behind why he kills criminals as a means to be a more efficient way dealing what he sees as proper justice. And that due to the implications of what happens to select people when they go bad, is what makes him so anxious and paranoid when a being like Superman is around. Not to mention, his moments of interacting with Alfred, played by Jeremy Irons, are probably some of my favourite scenes in the entire movie, alongside, of course, the warehouse scene, which showcases just how efficient and aggressive Bruce can be in hand-to-hand combat. So, as I stated earlier, my hate towards this movie originally was unbelievable, all because I was too held up on how I wanted to see this movie turn out, rather than accepting and focusing on the vision behind Zack Snyder. Thus, makes me believe that this film was just a little bit ahead of its time. And despite the fact that I still think that the final project as a whole is just a bit far off from being classified as good, I'm still glad that I was able to grow as a human, and that now I have absolutely nothing but respect for Mr. Snyder, as it seems as though Warner Brothers is largely to blame for its directions and unfortunate flaws. Which is why I'm going to give Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice a 6 out of 10. Keep in mind also that my current perspective of this movie may drastically change in the future, as do many other forms of entertainment. But whatever score I give is not the point of this video, but rather it's to explain that understanding a filmmaker, as well as seeing what they've gone through, is a great way to open up your eyes without projecting personal and arrogant hate. Because at the end of the day, they're just trying to show off their unique ideas on properties that have been around with us and inspired us for decades. So thank you so much for watching this video. If you're interested in checking out some of my other content, then feel free to click on the links that are on screen right now. And if you want to stay updated for when I upload next, click here to subscribe to my channel. Until we meet again, thank you once again for checking out. Stay safe out there, and I'll see you all later.